dostępność terytorialna i mobilność. Razem to znaczy blisko, a to wymaga sprawnej, funkcjonalnej i dostępnej sieci transportowej. Funkcjonowanie jednolitego rynku europejskiego zapewniającego swobodny przepływ towarów, usług i obywateli jest możliwe dzięki inwestycjom z polityki spójności w transeuropejską sieć transportową. Budowanie dostępności terytorialnej i mobilności wychodzi poza obszar europejskiej sieci transportowej, rozwijając też szereg mniejszych, lokalnych połączeń. Dziś system sieci transportowych staje się ważny z jeszcze jednego powodu – bezpieczeństwa i odporności. Kolejnym wyzwaniem jest zapewnienie mobilności dla wszystkich w obliczu ambitnych celów klimatycznych. Sieci musimy jednak stale rozwijać, aby były odporne na zagrożenia i służyły nam wszystkim. Jaka dziś jest przyszłość polityki spójności w obszarze transportu oraz mobilności w obliczu wyzwań związanych z bezpieczeństwem i zmianami klimatu?
Dzień dobry.
Chciałbym
About transport, about mobility, about some aspect of future of the cohesion policy. My name is Paweł Engel. I'm working at Center for EU Transport Projects, and I will have the pleasure to guide you through the next 2 hours. At the very beginning, I would like to welcome very warmly the host of this panel, Mr. Jarosław Orliński, Director of the Infrastructure Program Department from Ministry of Funds and Regional Development. I would like to welcome our panelists, and I will welcome them on the stage in a couple of minutes. But first of all, I would like to welcome all of you who came here to attend and to listen to our, I hope, very interesting discussion. Today's meeting will be graphically recorded for us by Mrs. Barbara Grzegorzewska, and the results of our discussion will be noted on the board. You can see the almost plain board at the moment on the screen. And during our discussion, the results will be shown, and also at the end of our panel, we will see the final results. You will also be welcome to join our discussion, answering questions online via our application, and this will appear later on. Now, let me introduce our experts, our panelists, who will be the actual, let's say, stars of today's afternoon. I would like to invite to join me at the stage and the discussion Sophie Defour, Climate and Freight Director of European Federation for Transport and Environment. Maria Carmen Corral Escribano, Deputy Director of Planning, TNT and Logistics, Minister of Transport, Mobility and Sustainable Mobility of Spain. General Catherine Dert, Brigadier General Director of Logistics at the European Union Military Staff. Alan Lynch, Head of Division at Strategic Transport Advisory Division, JASPERS, and European Investment Bank. Dionizy Smoleń, expert at PwC Poland. And Oksana Zikuna, Program Coordinator for European Funds for Infrastructure, Climate, Environment at the European Commission. So that's our guests. But before we go to the discussion itself, let me make a short introduction. I don't know if you remember when it was when Poland for the first time held the presidency in the European Union. Maybe someone of you remember. What the year was it? 2011, yes, 2011. So 14 years ago. And I thought today in the morning that what challenges were at the agenda at 2011. How Poland looked like in 2011. What were our goals? What were our obstacles? What were our problems? And what are our problems, challenges, opportunities also in 2025, excuse me, when we are holding the presidency for the second time. So let me very, very briefly compare these two moments, because I heard today in the main panel of our conference that transport is actually the greatest impact of the cohesion policy. I'm working for transport sector and cohesion policy since 2008, and I personally can observe the difference between 2008, 2011 and 2025. I suppose many of you came here by public transport in Krakow. Many of you will use it today in the evening, will use it tomorrow. Actually, I observed yesterday that in rush hours, I saw only one tram which was not a low-floor one. Only one. And dozens of quite modern, accessible tram cars, every bus accessible, and many of them electric. So that's only one point of change between these 2 years, 2011 and 2025. But having a look quite a bit broader. In 2011, I suppose most of us thought that the time of wars in Europe, that's something only in books, on history lectures. 3 years later, the first stage of Ukrainian war, and 2022, the full-scale aggression on the Ukraine. We see now completely different situation, completely different challenges, not only for the defense sector, not only for all the security issues, but also for transport, also for environment. And having in mind that, just one more thing in this comparison. In 2011, most of us, of course, had mobile phones, but only few of them were like a computer in a pocket. Now we use smartphones, we have everything in our pockets, starting from bank accounts, finishing on social media. But this also means that all our data we have in an IT cloud, and this creates another challenges for security. This creates another possibility to influence what's going on, especially when someone is trying to threaten what's happening. And cybersecurity is now also one of the biggest challenges before us. Demography remains the challenge. And also, and I want to finish with that point, I heard today in the morning a very important thing. What is one of the main goals of cohesion policy? What is one of the main goals of the European Union itself? And the treaty provides us with following answer. Territorial, social, economic cohesion is our goal. It's not only competitive economy, of course it is. It's not only common market, of course it is. It's not only security, of course, nowadays, for sure it is. But this altogether has to be fit into the goal set in the treaty, territorial, social, economic cohesion, which is also impossible without all these things I have mentioned just a minute ago. So I hope our today's discussion will be interesting for you. And now let us start with the presentation by Oksana Zikuna from European Commission, the presentation of 9th Cohesion Report published last year by the Commission. Oksana, the floor is yours. If you could please take the floor here, because here is also the pilot for the presentation, so it will be more convenient, I think, for you to use it. Next, and back.
Thank you very much for this introduction, and I would like to first say that I am honored to take part in this conference today, especially in Poland, as we heard this morning, but we know that also from the outset that Poland can be mentioned as a showcase of the country which benefited from the cohesion policy to improve its convergence. And as we also heard this morning after the vote, that it is perceived that the transport sector has benefited the most from the funds, from the EU funds, with a large gap from other areas. But I'd like to also mention that, of course, connectivity, mobility is not a standalone policy in the EU and in the member states. It is very much linked and it follows other EU policies. Climate policy, environmental policy, social affairs, employment, skills, education, and so we will consider all those links during today's discussion. So how it is affected, let's say, mobility and other policies, how it is linked to the single market. And in this regard, I would like to mention the one of the basic documents that is important at the level of the European Union, the Cohesion Report, which was also mentioned already today. I think the majority of you know what it is about. It provides a summary in a nutshell of achievements and describes different areas where the cohesion policy contributed, like economic, social, territorial cohesion, green transition, innovation, democratic transition, better governance, and so on and so forth. So we will focus today very briefly only on the transport area, on the mobility, and only to some, we will pay attention only to some highlights, because of course those who have seen the report, it's a very large document and lengthy, summarizes all the different findings and also very importantly, it provides conclusions and draws our attention at different lessons. So what is important concerning the developments in the area of mobility? Well, maybe the first point here is a bit pessimistic, but well, it is linked also to the topic of our discussion, climate change. So how does the mobility developments affect the climate change? So we heard about the success of the investing in roads and in rails, while at the same time we can see that emissions from transport has increased over this certain period of time, like almost 20 years. And the numbers of investments were impressive. 63 billion of euro only from the cohesion policy were invested in these rail and road networks in all the member states. So it's not only about Poland. And we should not forget that there is also the Connecting Europe facility and right now also RRF, who invests from the side of the EU in these objectives, in the transport priorities. And, well, the report emphasizes various, how to say, drawbacks, of course, which we still face after all these investments have been already done. In concrete terms, public transport and rail transport. Well, rail transport is supposed to be a generator of the promotion of the sustainable mobility. So from the side of the cohesion policy, I can inform that it is a priority, investments in zero-emission transport and in sustainable transport, and rail transport is one of the first which represent such sustainability. And public transport is extremely important for connections, of course, because as we also heard, transport exclusion in Poland only represents 40% of regions and remote areas which are not well connected. So public transport can take the form, of course, of railways and also buses, so public buses. So here I also immediately point out at those priority for our financing from the EU funds. And also the point discussed and raised in the cohesion report is about zero-emission vehicles. So how many do we have in member states? What are the plans? What are the projections? Do they have a charging infrastructure enough? So those working with EU funds investments have, of course, faced these questions from the side of the Commission when negotiating. So we should not forget also the charging infrastructure. And it is pointed out in the cohesion report that still, especially in the member states in the east of Europe, the points of where charging infrastructure is available are located still too far. So it's not possible to use normally such a zero-emission vehicle. So this is something to look ahead and still to be developed. And well, it was also mentioned this morning, the taxation policy. So transport and taxation, zero emission. And as you probably heard or at least read in the press, and it was mentioned in the introductory speech of Pan Holovnia today, the ETMS2. So the emission trading system, the implementation of it in 2025, when the actually fuels used in the transport should be charged also with additional taxation. And of course, we are to follow the objectives of the climate policy, so the Green Deal, and nobody now is challenging those objectives. Of course, we all understand the necessity to follow them, but of course, it is understandable, and that is mentioned as well in the cohesion report, that can have a side effects on the vulnerable population. So this is an example where the mobility is linked to the social policy. So it's and climate. So everything is interchanged here. We are following one priority. We think about connectivity, how to connect remote areas and what transport is available, cars or preferably public transport, and how would that influence the different levels of population, like, for example, the vulnerable side. And this is also a new element of the EU policies, the Social Climate Fund, where the regulation was adopted last year, and it speaks about transport poverty. So in addition to transport exclusion element, there is also this transport poverty element, the accessibility of remote territories. This has to be borne in mind when planning investments, and also the cost for the citizen of this transport investment. Very briefly, on the other challenges mentioned in the cohesion report in relation to the transport sector, in fact, they can be grouped in two large domains. One is connectivity related, and the second one is related to the climate goals, climate objectives. So the connectivity-related challenges that we have now in 2025 is about the density of roads, that road networks are sparser in member states in the east of the EU. So where population is thinner and infrastructure costs are more highly, so maybe it's more difficult to justify it. Also, road performance remains low in some eastern member states, again, and in thinly populated areas. Passenger rail performance, this is an area which needs to be developed. Its performance is still poor compared with road who generates, of course, CO2 emissions, like we all know. And also accessibility to education and healthcare services. Once again, the remote area has worse accessibility. And concerning the climate goals, these are EU Green Deal objectives, while the final target is in 2050 is to achieve climate neutrality. And how do we achieve climate neutrality? By investing in low emission transport means. Like I already said, rail being a good example. However, this is the area there is a lot of development still needed, because the rail speed cannot still how to say, it lags behind the speed of aircraft, which is also a more polluting mean of transport. And comparing travel time of rail and flights between the EU cities, between EU member states, still the rail lags behind. So there is also this consideration to compare the air transport and railway transport, not only cars and rail, but also rail and other means of transport. And electric vehicles, I already mentioned what will be the future of it, and it was also mentioned this morning. We are importer, of course, these vehicles, and we are not manufacturing so much. So this is also something to take into consideration. And low emission types of vehicles are not only electric, but also hydrogen. And as the cohesion reports points out, such hydrogen refueling points are only concentrated in small parts of the EU, so it is even worse than electric charging points. So with this, I think it's enough of introduction, pointing out at the challenges in the transport sector, and maybe we move on with the questions with the real panel. So thanks a lot for the attention.
Thank you. Thank you, Oksana, for this presentation. Just one thought I came to during what you have spoken. Last year, I decided to travel from Warsaw to Amsterdam to take part in a conference by train. And it took me 12 hours. It was a very nice journey with a stopover in Berlin to have lunch on Hauptbahnhof. However, for the journey back, I decided to take plane, because in 2 hours I was already in Warsaw. So I think it is a challenge to make this small shift happen. But going to our discussion, I would like to start with the question to Oksana, because you have mentioned in your speech, and it was also mentioned today in the morning in the speeches, that we have our goals are sustainable transport, clean public transport, new technologies, decarbonization, and many others, digitalization of transport. How can the cohesion policy contribute to those goals?
The answer to this question lies in its question itself. So the answer is affirmative. Clearly, the cohesion policy does everything to contribute to the goals of the sustainability, to the Green Deal goals, and taking into account the social aspects. And in what way? Well, I mentioned today the pollution, the CO2 emissions. So when we work with projects with cohesion policy funding, we always take into account so the priorities. What should be the priorities for funding? And so one of the priorities is to finance the transport means which is less polluting, and taking into account the needs of the public, which for us, of course, prevail over commercial needs or even individual needs. So good connectivity for public. So how do we achieve this goal of reducing emissions? And very concretely, in the cohesion policy, we have strict rules. These rules are even more strict than in other funds. Like, well, I should not maybe elaborate too much on the other funds, but very concretely, we do not finance projects a priori to invest in machines, in different transport means, apparatuses that use fossil fuels. So this is one example. When negotiating the programs, we agreed on the priority that such means that are operated by fossil fuels should not be supported from EU funds. This is how we help achieving the climate goals. Well, so if member states and regions are buying, with the help of EU funds, the various vehicles, those should be zero-emission vehicles, meaning that they are not operated with fossil fuels, because ERDF and Cohesion Fund regulation prohibits, does not support such investments. Also, the vehicles should be clean, follow the description of the directive on clean vehicles introducing such definition, and in particular this directive deals with the definition of zero-emission heavy-duty vehicles and clean heavy-duty vehicles which are bought for the public use, the public buses and public transportation. So public buses which may be supported from the funds are electric, hydrogen, battery-operated, natural gas-operated, so various alternative fuels. So these are very concrete directions how we pursue the climate goals. And not to forget that also in terms of investments in heavy-duty vehicles, in new ones, meaning buses for the use of the public, we should not forget that there is another provision of regulation putting a target for strengthening for strengthening the emission standards for such vehicles. And concretely, the buses used on the territory of the cities, in the urban territory by 2030, 90% of such new purchased buses should be low-emission buses. So these are very concrete examples how we help from the side of the cohesion policy to achieve objectives of other policies and to help the decarbonization in this concrete case. So thank you.
Thank you very much for the point you have made. I would like now to refer a bit to another report also released last year. On April 2024, there was a report by Enrico Letta, former Italian Prime Minister, published on the future of the EU single market. And what the author wrote in that report is actually that the diagnosis of EU economy is not favorable. The EU share in global economy is decreasing, and EU companies must compete with other global players not burdened with EU climate regulation. So there were also some recommendations made. And I would like to ask for an input from completely other point of view. Sophie, you are representing an international NGO. So how, from your point of view, you see the support from cohesion policy also to distinguish them from instruments managed directly by the European Commission?
Thanks so much. Yeah, sorry. First of all, I would like to say that I think cohesion funds are one of the core principles of the Union because we're all about solidarity, about redistribution, and I think that's what cohesion is really all about. So in that sense, it's already different from many of the other funds. But my organization, TNE, we recently did an analysis where we looked at the impacts of 15, 20 years of EU funds in Central and Eastern European countries to see indeed which projects have the most impact. And what we found was that really these urban and peri-urban projects that Oksana also talked about are often small scale, but have a very big impact in enhancing both sustainability and some of the social aspects that cohesion is in the end about. And if I may give an example, one of the projects that we came about was in the Romanian city of Kloy, and I hope I pronounced that correctly, where about 30 diesel buses were replaced by electric ones, as well as an additional bus line was added to the city to deal with congestion. The whole project cost less than 18 million, whereas we saw that travel times went down by 22%, public transport usage went up by 35%, and overall emissions went down by a factor of 2.6. So this is a small-scale project, and if we compare that to, for example, another example, maybe the not so good site, was the M4 line, the metro line in Budapest, where we saw that there was already a very good bus line available. That project cost 1.3 billion. It was conditional upon the introduction of a congestion tax, which in the end did not happen. So we would say for the future of cohesion, to think more about these small-scale urban projects, and also to build on what was said maybe this morning, is to merge the best parts of cohesion and the best parts of the RRF, in the sense that cohesion really has this more local approach, connectivity with the regions, and yeah, more local management, whereas an RRF is performance-based, which we do think could help with some of the less good projects maybe that we have seen.
Thank you very much. I think one important point that emerges already from these two answers and from the presentation is that we have to be very careful in setting our priorities, and maybe it is not possible to cover everything. Maria, the question to you. The cohesion report presented in 2024, Oksana also presented it to us, described how territorial disparities in the EU have changed in recent years and how cohesion policy influences these disparities and addresses these disparities. How do you see mobility then in the light of these climate challenges and in the light of also of security challenges?
Well, good afternoon. It's curious, just one figure to start by introducing this. We've seen, as Oksana explained, that the report gives the cohesion report gives a very, very important, focuses on the importance of sustainability in transport, and that is one of the priorities we come from. We started, I think connectivity was the first main priority for transport. Then it moved to sustainability, and this is what the cohesion report was showing. And although transport produces more than 25% of the greenhouse gas emissions in Europe, it doesn't receive, the transport sector, that 25% of the cohesion funds for sustainability. So it is very important that the founding programs accompany the European policies. We've seen, I think it was very interesting this morning when at the panel was showed that the objective is cohesion. I think that transport is an instrument. So it is natural that transport faces different challenges and evolves, applying the different policies. Because at the end, what we need, transport is what we need to get the other goals. Now, the challenges have changed. The new geopolitical situation, the climate change. We have to introduce in our conversations and in our planning instruments the resilience of the infrastructures and its security. We have seen that it was reflected in the TEN-T regulation. We have been incorporating those concepts in our national transport programs, I think. But the main challenge is to put all those priorities at the same level and in an integrated manner. We cannot have the different priorities of transport competing between itself. I mean, what is more important for transport? Do we need a sustainable network? Do we need a strong, resilient network? Do we need a totally connected and interoperable network so that all our military equipment can move along Europe? Do we prioritize goods or do we prioritize passengers? I mean, we have so many questions, and at the end, it is very important that national and European programs integrate all those concepts at the same time and from the very beginning, and that founding policies go along with that integration. We need also to think in operation. We cannot think only in infrastructure investments. We need to coordinate. I think that is one of the main challenges also for climate resilience in the unfortunate catastrophe we had in Valencia last autumn. We really lived the need to be very, very, very well coordinated, how to use multimodality and intermodality to cover to cover the problems of one mode of transport with the other one, and in between different administrations. So, and the same happens with military mobility. I mean, for the first time, we sit like every week or every 2 weeks with the Ministry of Defense in order to make the better use or the best use of the transport network we have, because there's not a specific transport network for military movements. It is our network. And in the case of a war or a crisis, I'm sure all the civil operators and private operators will be there to move what is needed to be moved. So at the end, I think we need coordination, we need multimodality, and we need to be able to see that when we plan the different, the new financial framework, and that transporting is not another objective, it is a mean. And if we want to tackle and get the different other goals, we need to continue investing in transport.
Thank you very much. Maria, thank you also for mentioning the military mobility in our discussion, because now I would like to ask the question to our representative of the military. When considering the rapidly evolving security situation, well, the security situation in 2025 is completely different than those in early 2020, for example, not taking into account even the COVID. So what initiatives and action is EU taking in the field of military mobility? We all, of course, know about Connection Europe facility. But what are maybe other initiatives in order to catch up with reality which we do have now, and what are the main challenges from the point of view of the military side?
Okay. Yes, okay. First of all, I want to say thank you for also inviting the military side of the EU House, especially in this domain. Secondly, I totally relate to what Maria just said, because military and civilian part of the mobility aspect, they share the same goals. They're intertwined, they're linked one with another. But maybe I will start with the second part of your question. What are, from a military perspective, the main challenges and the main barriers that we need to address? We think, or we see them as threefold. First of all, there's EU regulations and legislations, and then especially the military restrictions that we face. We often say that we would like a military Schengen. We often have EU regulations or regulations that make it easier for civilian mobility, except for the military. And that hampers flexibility for the military when it comes to mobility in peacetime. Because officially, we're in peacetime. And then also the national caveats. And the best example I can give you is the military corridor from the Netherlands, Germany, and Poland. If you have military convoys coming from the Netherlands through Germany to Poland, military convoys always have to be very well marked, obviously. And then in the Netherlands, you have to put a kind of sign or a flag on one side of your vehicles, of the whole convoy. When you come to the border in Germany, you have to add the second flag on both sides of the vehicle. And then when you go to Poland, you have to again put the flag on the other side. So the impact, this might seem a stupid example, or how is this possible? But this is the barriers that we face. Second, we face totally different threats nowadays. We talk about hybrid, we talk about cyber, and often we hear say, we are at war. But officially, we are not at war. But in order to be well prepared, a kind of some amount of flexibility for the military is needed also in peacetime to be prepared. So what we often ask for is you have a very clear peacetime definition, you have a very clear wartime definition, which is linked to conventional warfare, but there's nothing that exists during crisis. And maybe the in-between phase also needs or deserves some kind of attention in that domain. So regulations, legislation, that's one. Second is infrastructure. And when we talk about infrastructure, we all know railways, the roads, inland waterways when we think of Europe. But when we talk about infrastructure, it's more than just the roads and everything I just mentioned. It's also the hubs. Because if we talk about, worst case scenario, 75 brigades that need to go from one point to another, and please don't forget, Europe thinks 360 degrees, so not only west-east, but we think 360. That would mean, if you talk about 75 brigades, that would mean, if you put all the equipment and the vehicles head to tail, 1,300 kilometers, meaning from the port of Antwerp to Warsaw. I used this example when Belgium had the presidency and did also a conference on military mobility and on mobility as a whole. But this is reality. Of course, troops are prepositioned. And it's also not a one-shot going from the west to the east or north-south or south-north. It's continuous, because you have to have logistic chains of supply. So this has an enormous impact on our roads, our rails, and so forth. So we have to think of everything, all aspects with regards to infrastructure. And third, it's capabilities. And capabilities are also much more than just assets and equipments. It's also services, fuel, for example, food. Remember the 1,300 kilometers, which means enormous amount of troops that continuously flow from one point to another on a continuous way, enormous impact. Now, if we can tackle those three barriers or challenges, there are some preconditions for success. One, we need to align our efforts. And not only within EU, but also the member states, but also with NATO, for example. Second, I always say we tend to talk about military mobility, but it's a whole of government responsibility. And if you add resilience to this equation, it becomes a whole of society responsibility. So we have to work together. We cannot do this on our own, in our own bubble. And I think this is also what Maria just said. Last but not least, when it comes to preconditions for success, exercise, exercise, exercise. And if you want to exercise mobility, it's not, we will plan an exercise a year in advance, so that means that I can tackle all the barriers that I will encounter. An exercise on mobility and then by extension military mobility, is when I can do this and see if maybe just a platoon can go from Antwerp to Warsaw within the 5 days that we require. We all know it won't work. But that's the only way we can tackle the barriers we encounter. Lessons identified. And that's one of the problems. We identify a lot of lessons, but it's very difficult to make them lessons learned. Now, what do we do? There's the action plan on military mobility, I suppose 2.0 from 2022. We all know about it. And this is a joint effort from the EAS, so the External Action Service, meaning also the EUMS, the military staff from EU, with the Commission and EDA. So, and then in close coordination with DG Move, we have our network. So a combination of civilian and military network. We identify the network, we identify the corridors, we identify the gaps, and we identify the hotspots. But what we also do is, we don't do it in our own corner. We talked to the US, we talk to JSEC from NATO to make sure that we do what is in line, align our efforts, that we do what is in line, what should be in line with what is required from NATO. From an EUMS, military staff perspective, we have the military requirements for military mobility. We are already at our third revision, but then we set the military standards, the military network, the military criteria for funding. You talked about CEF, you all know about it, but so we closely collaborate or work together with DG Move and are also involved in the eligibility process to make sure that dual use, one of the buzzwords within EU, is taken into account. So when member states get funding or think about improving their infrastructure in the broadest sense of the word, the military aspects or requirements are not forgotten. We all know the strategic compass, of course, which is important. We optimize our coordination. As I said, we talk to JSEC, we talk to the US, but independently from the College of Auditors, I had my people do a mapping of all stakeholders and all projects with regards to mobility, but also military mobility. I've never seen such a spaghetti. So we need to coordinate better in all the efforts that we do, because time is of the essence. And also, we raise or we try to repeat the message as much as possible. And I know from the Commission, especially like with DG DEFIS, for example, they're really working hard on those 3 domains, the barriers I spoke about. So it may go slowly sometimes, and too slowly, in our opinion, but there's progress. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have touched military mobility, we have touched infrastructure, many different fields also, but now I'd like to move to the next question to Mr. Dionysis Smoleń, because of course our infrastructure has significantly changed during the years in the EU. What priorities should cohesion policy adopt in this area for the next financial perspective, and maybe how should it correspond with the security issues, with the dual use problems?
Good afternoon. Thank you for inviting me. As you rightly said at the very beginning of our panel, European Commission and first of all, cohesion policy should respond to contemporary challenges, including challenges related to defense and security. And in my opinion, cohesion policy should be able to interact with other policies, including also cohesion policy and security policy. As Ms. Oksana Zikuna said also a few minutes ago, cohesion policy should meet objectives of other policies, interact with other policies, let me say, cooperate with other policies. How to do it? By focusing on, as you already mentioned, dual use solution, also in the field of transport infrastructure, to serve both civilian purposes and military purposes. How to do it? By using integrated approach. I remember the first operational program for regional development implemented by Poland at the very beginning of our presence into the EU. It was in 2004. I was a civil servant participating in preparation of this document. The document was called Integrated Regional Development Program. And the idea behind this word integrated was to combine different activities to achieve synergistic approach to solve different problems. And now, in my opinion, to a certain extent, we need to rediscover this word integrated approach and implement in the framework of cohesion policy all activities meeting objective of cohesion policy, but at the same time try, reinforce, assist in meeting also other objectives referring to security and defense policy. You gave, Ms. General, many examples of dual-use solutions, bridges, highways, railways, seaports, but there is a lot of opportunities of combining both spheres, and meeting cohesion policy doesn't exclude meeting defense and security policies. Let me also raise another issue. To do it properly, we should reinforce the dialogue between public sector representatives and military representatives. We should find a way to communicate each other. Public sector should understand the needs of military, and at the same time military should be able to communicate properly what are their needs. So on the one hand, we are talking on communicating needs. On the other hand, we should communicate what is possible to be financed through structural funds, for instance. So coordination and communication are key to meet objectives of cohesion policy and defense and security policy.
I very much like the sentence that we cannot do it in our bubble, you have mentioned before, and it very much corresponds with what you have just said, that we have to integrate, we have to reinvent the word reintegration. I think it's very, very important for not only for the future of the cohesion policy, but in general for the policy itself, to be able to achieve different goals in an integrated manner. But I would like to put the following question, Alan, to you, because Jaspers has been well known for advisory, how to prioritize investments, among also other things. We are now competing with higher demand of security measures, low emission measures, solving transport solution. So how to tackle all this stuff?
Thank you, Pavel. Can you hear me? Thanks very much, and first of all, thank you for inviting us to participate here. For those who don't know Jaspers, I think most people probably do here, but just to say that we've been covering advisory in Poland since the beginning of Jaspers, since back in 2005, and we have 20 years next year, which is, it's amazing how the time has flown. We've had a great relationship here in Poland with the managing authorities, with the beneficiaries, and with SUPT as well. and we had the opportunity to attend their 10-year reunion, which is probably about 5 years ago now. So I think it's been a long relationship. And in fact, the Congress Hall here as well was supported by Jaspers when it was submitted for EU funding as well. So it is. It covers more than just transport as well. In terms of, let's say, our how we can try to have this integrated approach in terms of military security considerations into the transport planning context. I mean, what we have seen is that over the years this has developed, and as Maria said earlier, you know, we started with certain objectives regarding the transport networks, included sustainability, and now of course security and sustainability and resilience is now something that we are seeing more and more coming into sharp focus. I mean, we've been involved in doing the transport planning in many of the countries, not just at project preparation level, but then we went back to transport planning level, and we have been helping with the integration of climate resilience into the plans at national level, regional level, and at urban level as well, across in Poland here and in other countries, in Spain as well. Maria, we were supporting on adaptation, integration into the national planning. I mean, the aspect of integrated planning is something that we hear mentioned all the time, but really, you know, what we're looking at here from the security perspective is, and from, let's say, external factors which impact, which also relate to climate, how to withstand, how to respond, and how to recover from climate and security discontinuities, as we would call them. This is something that wasn't focused on, I would say, and up to now we have to try and see how to make a greater, let's say, emphasis on including it within the planning context. Here, I think there are a number of aspects to it. We normally, when we're doing our advice on planning, we look at measures rather than the infrastructure aspect itself. It was also mentioned here, it's not just about the assets, it's about the operations of these assets, it's about institutional measures to ensure that these can be effectively operated. So you have these various measures, and this is just part of normal, let's say, good practice in planning. And this can be then applied also to the security aspects as well as climate as well. So here's often I see this focus on the investment side, and of course we're working in the EIB. We normally have a focus on investment, but from the advisory perspective, we look at this more holistic approach to the planning, and this is something that's often missing. We look at programming as well, because in fact we work with you know, many of the mandates. We're obviously with Cohesion Policy, but we're working through Connecting Europe Facility. We work with JTF. We work just in the neighbouring countries to the member states with DG NEAR. So we're effectively working with all our different stakeholders. There are different objectives, and a lot of it is linked to programming aspects rather than, let's say, kind of a broader planning objectives linked between all of the funding sources. So this is one of the challenges, I would say, that we face, to try and harmonize the approach to ensure that what we advocate as a robust planning process in transport, that it covers everything, irrespective of the funding source, because this is often a problem. We look to different pots of money and opportunities for accessing funding for whether it be climate or whether it be now security or military mobility opportunities. Then we start to make our planning on that basis, which is a mistake. You need to really concentrate on this broader integrated approach to the transport network, and then from that you will have an investment strategy which will then look at the various pots of money that you can either access financing or funding. I think also you need to align objectives. I mean, I think often what we're seeing is that there's a discontinuity between national objectives and EU objectives. We see this at cohesion level as well. We see the areas which are, let's say, less developed. Of course, they benefit from cohesion funds. However, we still see them lagging behind because some of the objectives are not necessarily linked closely with those of, let's say, national objectives. This applies to climate, this applies to security and military mobility, and we have been working very closely with Poland and with other neighboring member states to Ukraine, because we're also developing the extension of the EU gauge rail network into Ukraine and into Moldova. And this is a difficult exercise because we need to align everyone's objectives here. They are different, and it's not something that can be done overnight. It requires very heavy stakeholder engagement, and this is something as well that we need to bring all the stakeholders to the table. Here, it's a wide, if we're looking at it from the security perspective, it's a much wider stakeholder engagement. We're looking at law enforcement, but we look at customs, we look at all the logistics, we look at from the security and defense objectives, etc. And of course, it was mentioned the corridors and the integrating these security corridors with that of the TEN-T network, ensuring that there's a harmonization in terms of approach. These require a lot more engagement with counterparts that we may not have engaged with, let's say, routinely in the when we were, let's say, doing our planning process before. So I think that they're the main, let's say, challenges that we've seen, because we have been involved doing transport planning, as I say, for 20 years in many of the countries. There are gaps, there are strong and weak points in every member state in this regard. But for sure, the issue of security and military mobility has not really been really, let's say, one of the high priorities up to now. And this has got to change. It doesn't mean it cannot be integrated. Many of the aspects related to sustainability and military mobility, they are not mutually exclusive. They're very closely aligned. Sustainable investment in sustainable modes of transport and ensuring that there's the considerations for security, this is perfectly fine. There's no reason why we cannot have it complementary. Similarly, for cohesion policy, much of the investments can be made in lesser developed areas with a military context, within a security context, and within also other resilient aspects which can be, linked in to the overall integration. So I think that many of these things can be done. There are opportunities for to bring these together so that you can actually tap into the available funding and financing. Because for sure, in the future, eligibility is a very big part of it. And if you're not eligible, you're going to have problems. So you need to develop your planning process so that you will be able to answer the questions from the various funding and financing sources.
Thank you very much. Now the floor will be yours, our virtual floor. I would like you to answer question in our application, and if I may ask to, yes, if you have problems with the internet because we are very much deep inside the building, you can use the Wi-Fi, and the data for logging into the Wi-Fi are presented now. And in a moment you will see two possibilities of entering our application. First is the QR code, the second is entering the address into the browser and enter the code. And then you will see the question and possible answers there. And take your time to use the application, take your time to put your answer, and in the meantime we will continue our discussion. After the results are ready, they are all ready, they will be shown on the screen. But in the meantime, the question to Dionysi, in the context of our geopolitical challenges, how should cohesion policy evolve to support the development of dual-use infrastructure, and maybe not only dual-use infrastructure, because dual-use it's not only the case of transport infrastructure.
Interesting question. Yes, let me risk a thesis, risk thesis, but dual use is almost everywhere in many aspects of cohesion policy. This is not only infrastructure, not only transport, this is also innovation, or even especially innovation, entrepreneurship. So I have two ideas in mind answering your question. First idea that we should elaborate on dedicated instruments or programs to support dual use, like military mobility on the one hand, but in my opinion we should also shape or direct traditional cohesion policy into to include the needs of within it the needs of security and defense policy. Why not to decide, for instance, at the level of monitoring committee for particular programs, additional points for projects meeting dual use solution, and we have two objectives achieved: cohesion policy plus security and cohesion policy. There are many. By talking about dual use, we mentioned infrastructure aspects, but we didn't mention digitalization, for instance. We have logistics well developed in civilian sector. Why not to move certain digitalization solutions from civil sector to military sector to track, for instance, purchases, etc. So, and maybe thirdly, institutional aspects. We should reinforce coordination not only at the level of European Union, NATO, but also at the national or even regional and local levels. Why not to include dual-use solution within regional operational programs? Even now, I recognize more and more interest among regional authorities to coordinate their efforts with, for instance, defense industry. Some regions are planning to identify their abilities, regional abilities to reinforce defense industry. I'm mentioning it to say that there is more and more interconnections between cohesion policy and defense and security policy. And I fully agree with you, Madam, said from Spain about this reinforcing coordination. This is, I think, absolutely crucial. Exchange of information, reinforce coordination among different services, and I'm absolutely convinced that military and civil servants should start to talk, to better understand each other, to better understand the needs. As Ms. General rightly said, they are military procedures and they are civil procedures. So we should coordinate everything, standardize the procedure, and be ready. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I don't know if we. I think we have. Yes, we have the results. And that's the good point to start the next question, because we are talking about very much today about combining goals. And speaking very broadly, one goal in European policy is to ensure that the transport infrastructure supports the common market. On the other hand, other goal is to focus on zero emission technologies. Sophie, do you think can it be combined, or is it not possible at all?
I think you can certainly be combined, and I think there's also good examples of where we've done that. But I think it's, as Maria said, it's wider than just climate and security. There's also accessibility, affordability. There's so many goals that we want to achieve with our transports. And I think to get there, we should get better in data collection, data analysis, cost-benefit analysis, looking at environmental impacts, at socioeconomic impacts. And I think that's where cohesion could still do better, and cohesion funds could still do better. If I may give an example more on the climate aspects, which is more my area of expertise. For example, if we look at airports, which also got a quite large envelope from cohesion money, so there's been a lot of airport expansion, airport upgrading, but that was not always that good value for money. Maybe an example in Poland is the Lodz airport, which is very close to the Warsaw airports. And then in the initial plans, they expected a lot more passengers than we actually see now, because they did not take into account that they were obviously competing with the Warsaw airports. So I think those are a couple of things where we can better plan, better take into account, do better data analysis, and that will allow us to combine many more of these goals. And I don't think they have to be contradictory. I do think we can achieve it all, but we have to really work towards it and take good data into account.
Thank you very much. You put forward the points I very much like. I mean the data collection and CBA. So let's safely move to another question. Maria, you have mentioned about the integration of goals. And one of the goals of the cohesion policy is to support the sustainable transport. And what positive elements of the implementation of cohesion policy, but also other financial mechanisms you use, could you recommend as worth continuing, and which maybe should be abandoned? It's especially important because we, for example, in Poland, are now facing the stage you were facing in Spain already several years ago, when the cohesion policy support, starting from very, very high amount, became then much, much lower, and the accession to this, the accessibility of these funds were much more difficult.
Well, it is okay. Just for the audience to have the same information as we do, Spain stopped being a beneficiary of the Cohesion Fund in 2013. So until then, we were getting from 2000 to 2013, we received almost 25 billion euros for transport coming from EU funds. And we moved, and for example, from period, just to compare similar periods from 2014 from 2007 to 2013, we received 8.6 billion euros from the cohesion policy for transport, and we moved to receiving less than 2.5. So it is less than 25% that we were getting. In this period, we were receiving approximately 2.1. So we had to somehow, I'm a little bit afraid of saying so, because I was going to say a very, very, very responsible planning, which seems that we didn't do that before, but we did, but we needed to improve, to do even more responsible planning. We had to prepare very good portfolios and be able to maximize the use of the different programs for each, in order to get the different objectives. So at the end, and that is the same as we are doing now. I mean, we had to optimize the use of the structural funds that we are still benefiting from for those regions that get the most percentage of financing from those regional development funds. Then we are using the most we can use from the Connecting Europe facility to guarantee the continuity in the core network corridors, now European transport corridors. Then the use of blending facilities, which we learned to use thanks to the Jasper's help, by the way. And join with the private sector to be able to manage those financings, those investments. So at the end, the experience made us classify the different investments in the different European programs, identifying the clear objectives of each of them, and then using them for the different investments we had. So I think that is something that also, when the programs are going to be defined from the European Commission point of view, need to be considered. And what we like from those programs and what we don't like, and what should be continued and what should be stopped. Well, with the experience we have now, because we have used all the programs and we are coordinating all the programs from the same department, which is very important in that sense, because you have the project portfolio and how you can guarantee the financial sustainability of that portfolio in the same unit. What we see is that we cannot use one single program for all the transport investments. I mean, not all of them are, they're different, and we need the different programs to continue. The RRF has its advantages. The flexibility of the RRF is good. The reforms that the RRF brings are also in the cohesion policy. I mean, under the structural funds, we have the enabling conditions. Enabling conditions are somehow forcing the different member states to make responsible planning and to do reforms. So at the end, it has also its advantages. We cannot rely on the member states to plan the use of the European funds, because otherwise we wouldn't make contributions to the European budget. Why do we do so if we're going to get the money back and do whatever we want with it? So we need to be careful with that. We need to be careful to double structures. I mean, for direct investments, I think national programs are national-based programs are very interesting, because, the European sets the conditions and I invest, as the European Commission says. But if I have to give that money to a third company, a third person, then I need to implement a funding mechanism at national level. So I'm doubling. There's a European mechanism working for that funding program, and then there's a national program again for the same purpose. So we need to be careful when we design these programs that we don't double efforts. And on the other side, for connectivity that we've been saying here and we've mentioning here, in the TEN-T, we need a complete TEN-T network. We cannot have patches. So Europe should not be a patchwork. And if we want that, we need a centralized, managed program. Because otherwise, how do we guarantee that the European funds go to the European added value projects, not national added value projects? I think, and that is something that CEF guarantees. So we need to see the best of each program, and there's something that we need to lose, which is the, I don't know how to say it, the clear categorization of investments. Let's put it this way. The difference, for example, between maintenance and upgrade. the cohesion policy doesn't co-found maintenance, but they do with the upgrades. So when it comes to an adaptation of the infrastructure to military mobility, or an important action, a maintenance action that will guarantee the climate resilience of that infrastructure, where are we? Should it be co-financed or not? Because is this climate resilience or investment, or is this a maintenance investment? I mean, it is. So there, probably, we need, of course, again, data and information and expertise, like to identify in each case what we're talking about. And that means that although we need clear rules, we need flexibility to move within those rules.
Thank you very much. It also very much corresponds with the answers we got for our application. But I would like to follow a bit a point about merging goals, about achieving different goals. Because when we are talking about the goal about reducing carbon footprint, and on the other hand, we are talking about defense, about security. What challenges and opportunities in accessing EU funds and generally in merging those two goals to see that from the military point of view, from transport, for military transport networks, is it possible to make it greener, or it doesn't play any role when we are talking about security and defense, General?
Of course it does. Of course it does. In the military, we'll always need fossil fuels, and it will be very hard, you know, on a short term and midterm to make the shift towards, especially when you talk about major equipment and especially combat military equipment, to make the shift to renewable energy. But that does not mean that studies are ongoing. Research is ongoing. But it's a slow process. This is something that is obvious and that is that we see on a daily basis. But if you then come to remember my 3 barriers and I look at infrastructure, also saying that infrastructure means hubs, convoy support centers, the compounds, that means that in that case, everything that is more static all over Europe, also military hubs, can be more energy, or how do you, environment friendly, if I can call it like this. So there's a lot of going on when the minute it is static, so that it has durable profit, to call it like this, that we can do this. But that does not mean that, yeah, okay, also on the current fossil fuel level, we will need to maybe do something more, especially as a lot of high authorities in NATO and EU say that in a few years we might encounter issues with on the eastern border. I will call it like this, say it like this. So redundancy is a word, a buzzword that has not been stated yet. So meaning also in energy, we need to be redundant. So work on renewable, but also expand what we have. And then, for example, I think of CEPS, the European pipeline system. We should expand the network, because it's also one of the parts in infrastructure and services that are required when it comes to mobility and infrastructure. Not only expand the network, but also maybe increase our capacity. If I use my home nation example, Our pipeline system, 95% of it is used by civilian dual use. Is in a current state is used by civilian, being the airports and so forth and so on. Only 5% is for the military use. Great example of dual use. But it has a reserve of about 5 days. So what do we do after 5 days if there's a cut in accessibility or in the flow of the fuel? So there's a lot of stuff that needs to be addressed in that part. Going back again to when you talk about defense industry, maybe it's difficult because defense industry or the defense part of the security is just the outer layer of my vice-chart, my former vice-chart talked about the onion. And you know, there's different layers in security. And the defense part is the outer layer of security. And in the military, you always say, or no, in civilian world, we say we prepare for the worst in order, and you hope for the best. Hope is not a military strategy. So we say we prepare for the worst, or at least for a bad situation, in order to preserve our personal, individual, and economic freedom, because that's what we're here for. And then when you talk about this and what needs to be done with our counterparts of defense industry, there's two things that they always tell me. And you hear it from different sides or different domains in defense industry. They tell us, help us to address this, being how can we make it interesting for the defense industry to increase their production capacity without I will say differently, I will start over. How can we make it more interesting for the defense industry, knowing that in regime, when all goes well, 50% of that production line will not work because economy is important. Also, the second thing they always ask me is, why does it always, all military equipment has become very technical, it's with specificities and so forth and so on, so why not go back to robustness? Make it simple, standardization, interoperability. If you say, we have a lot of equipment that is used by different member states, but they're not always interoperable because of all the specifics that every member state asks. So this is often what they ask for, make it more robust, make it interesting for us to add production lines that hopefully will never be used because that's what we aim for. And then you come back to regulations because some member states are not allowed to produce, defense industry is not allowed to produce without contracts. And everyone is asking, okay, start producing, start producing, start producing, and we will see if we get contracts. So there's a contradiction there. So this is also one of the things that might be or might need to be addressed. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. And following that thread, Alan, we can see that we have, as a member state, as all member states, we have to retrofit existing transportation infrastructure and also other infrastructure towards meeting new security standards, not only in terms of dual use. And are there any recommendations from you, from Jaspers, how to do it without compromising sustainability goals?
Thank you. Yes, well, I mean, I think firstly, I think we need to refer to dual use. I mean, a lot of, let's say, the advice we provide is it isn't so security specific or military specific. We start from the inner layers of the onion, as you said, because of course there is huge investment needs to support this outer layer, which is effectively, you know, the final, let's say, more explicit funding necessary for let's say, military and military mobility. The dual use aspect is a huge amount, has to go in terms of the planning for this and in terms of investment. So this has to be done, and so the tip of the iceberg, in fact, it's quite a large tip, but it's still a tip of the iceberg, is this more explicit, specific financing to the military. So, I mean, here a lot can be done in terms of, first of all, demonstrating that without retrofitting, demonstrating, in fact, a lot of the investments that you are already making are, in fact, or could be utilized in a way that would be suitable for, let's say, for security aspects which were not considered before. And this is kind of more a planning aspect rather than actually trying to retrofit. And we did this also in climate as well. Many of our counterparts have been introducing climate adaptation into their planning process in a way that wasn't necessarily systematic in the sense of it being identified as climate adaptation, but it was recognized as something that was needed in order to make it sustainable. The same will be here. I mean, I think it's going to be, how do we ensure that the investments we're making and in the planning process are going to be resilient? And, you know, we see in the case in Ukraine, for example, they have a rail system that actually seems to be quite resilient in the sense that even though it's heavily damaged, you know, because of the resilience of it in the fact that it's quite manual system, that it's actually they're able to switch lines very, very easily. The whole system doesn't come down. So there's aspects of this, and it relates also to this discussion on redundancy as well. What are the alternatives when something goes out? Do you have a backup for that as well? Even in the simple case in roads, if you take a road out, do you have another road that's actually going to get you from A to B in a, let's say, parallel or similar? So this is a kind of a level of redundancy, but if you can demonstrate this through a planning process, it can be seen then as an investment that would actually maybe go above and beyond what would be normally considered under economic efficiency when you just look at normal investment. But if you're looking to ensure that this is part of your resilience program, you can, in fact, you know, make this justification. I mean, I think there's a lot around areas like disaster relief, civil protection, emergency equipment, which, in fact, you know, in the case of EIB, we have funded projects which have actually finance projects which are, you know, which are the promoters being the Ministry of Defence, but they're actually providing equipment that is used for civil protection as well and for firefighting as well. So they have a dual role. So the dual infrastructure actually works both ways. It's not necessarily just the coming from the civil side potentially used for military. You have also from the military side which is used for civilian protection or disaster relief as well. So it just needs a change of mindset, I think, firstly, that we need to be able to identify the opportunities, let's say, within our system, and leaving the kind of the funding and opportunities to one side, but really looking at it from the perspective of sustainability and resilience, that you know, we need to now start to reprogram ourselves in terms of how to approach the transport planning. I think the other aspect is the transition. It was mentioned also. How do we transition? Because of course, you know, in the case of military, will require fossil fuels for a long time into the future. How are we going to reconcile that, especially in terms of eligibility? Because of course, if we say we don't finance fossil fuels, let's say, or assets related to fossil fuels, then of course, from a military perspective, this is unsustainable. I mean, it is something that has to be addressed within the planning process, but also within the allocation of funding for this, and the timing as well, because of course, you know, the delivery in terms of climate, we've seen that things take a long time in terms of actually meeting our targets in terms of investment. From a security perspective, I think there is a sharper focus. I mean, the timing is not the same, even though climate aspects are upon us now. Security really is upon us, and we don't have time to spend the next years discussing this. We need to put in place the necessary provisions sooner rather than later.
Thank you very much. We are now heading quite fast towards the start of the new financial perspective, because now we have the beginning of 2025, and the next financial perspective should start at the beginning of 2028. So we have barely 3 years to develop maybe new solutions. And my question to Oksana, are there already any plans from the side of the Commission for the Cohesion Policy 2028 Plus to support mobility in the context of new challenges such as climate change, security, critical infrastructure, also having in mind social inclusion and territorial and social and economic cohesion?
Thank you. So let's think about cohesion policy in big terms. There is a decision-making process and there is an implementation process. So decision-making process in the cohesion policy has always been very much implemented with the help of the partnership principle. So initiative should come from citizens, NGOs, those who really work with the cohesion policy, those who are beneficiaries, so those who reap the benefit, and also ordinary citizens. So we need to hear their voice. And that has always been the cornerstone of the cohesion policy, and transport area, connectivity area is no different from other areas in this sense. And when it comes to the implementation, it's very good that you referred to the terminology of the financial perspectives. Indeed, the European Union budget is planned and operates in terms of financial periods, so a 7-year period. So now we are in the period 21-27, the next one will begin in 28. And as the previous speakers have already elaborated, the numbers of puzzles that need to be put together has been growing from the very beginning of the implementation of cohesion policy, in particular in the member states who joined in 2004 and later. At first, during the first financial perspectives, there were connectivity and, I would say, environmental considerations already at that time. Then, to those puzzles, notably in 2021, sustainability joined, digitalization, so green Europe and connected Europe. And at that time, we can say that from the point of view of security, already we started to invest in dual use. So now when we are approaching the new financial perspective of 28, there are more puzzles that are coming to the picture that we need to compose, all of them. So these are competitiveness, also prosperity and cost that were mentioned in the Draghi report. There is security that was mentioned in the Niinisto report. So more and more puzzles are in front of us. And so those who deal with the implementation, they are confronted in everyday life with how to best match all those puzzles in the picture, and being also cost effective, of course. So we think about connectivity, decarbonization, digitalization, being friendly to the environment, being cost efficient, and so on and so forth. And so the strategies for the future should also come from the beneficiaries, from the citizens. So the ideas are gathered also in consultations, in public consultations, through NGOs, for example, who have a particular voice in relation to the environmental protection. And so what will be the strategies beyond 2027 is really to be efficient in the implementation of all the pieces of the puzzles we already have, adding to this tense geopolitical situation and new needs. So, well, and in this context, what is also important, as Alan has mentioned, this is transport planning. And it took a while to understand for the administrations and for the regions, for the beneficiaries, that transport investments need to be made according to viable plans. So the territorial plans, the urban plans. At certain point in time, this was a new element that appeared, like planning documents. And certainly this will be supported for the future, because this gives a solid background for the investments. The solid planning documents presenting development of notably multi-modal transport will continue to be the basis for the transport planning. And again, what is linked to the transport planning are also environmental concerns that we have to also not to forget. We mentioned several times climate targets and climate objectives. There are also environmental objectives when bearing in mind any transport investments. There are strict requirements concerning the sustainable environmental impact assessments. The specific documents need to be produced, and of course this will be continued in the future, because when we build roads, we should not destroy the Natura 2000 areas, we should not destroy national parks and other forests and territories which are also useful to our population. And concerning maybe what challenges we will have ahead of us, from the perspective of the Commission services who work in collaboration on different areas, it is vital also to check that there is no overlapping and there is no double financing, because also the number of instruments is growing. 20 years ago, this was one set of instruments. Now, also taking into account new areas that will be further elaborated to take into account the concerns of security, and so which instruments will deal with that. And we will have to see the administrations and those who implement it, that all those resources are used in a sound manner. So this is something also to bear in mind. Well, basically, yeah, this is all I wanted to say in this regard. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You mentioned just the puzzles which are on the table, and Dionys, a question to you: how make these puzzles work, especially also when we are all, on the other hand, striking a balance between civilian and military needs, dual use, security needs? How to balance it? How to make it work?
Yes. Third, maybe reflections. Firstly, it's worth using so-called integrated approach. Reinvent this word, integrated. in terms of integration of different policies, but also by using this characteristic of cohesion policy, which is flexible and multi-dimensional. And that is why they gives a lot of chances to use dual-use solutions. Secondly, we should create or reinforce the dialogue between different stakeholders, including public sector officials and institutions, and also defense sector and military sector. And maybe third reflection, building awareness. It's important to be aware. What are our objectives, how we would like to cooperate. It's worth disseminating good practices regarding using dual-use solutions, etc., but increase awareness among key stakeholders, but also among society. So we need integrated approach, dialogue, cooperation and coordination, and awareness.
Thank you. Yes, thank you very much. Alan, question to you about the possible future financial instruments. What do you believe will be especially relevant for achieving the security and defense and transport priorities?
Thanks. Yes, just, I mean, I wouldn't speak about necessarily the instruments themselves, but let's say look at the opportunities. Of course, there are instruments, and there will be, these instruments will also be developed in the future, which will be able to cater for, let's say, the requirements in terms of military funding and financing. I mean, just from an EIB perspective, just to give. EIB in the next 3 years will kind of do 95 billion per year, but that's its lending total envelope for everything. Last year it would have done 12 billion lending to transport. 50% of all of its lending is climate action. So this is it's quite important to know this as well. So this is effectively part of the sustainability aspect of EIB as a climate bank. 1 billion has been directed towards support to security. This will increase to 2 billion, expected this year for 2 billion and in the years ahead. So there's a focus on dual use as well. I mean, that's where currently the bank is directing its eligibility for let's say securities. It's focusing on dual use. There are other facilities like the defense equity facility with the EIF, and that's supporting venture capital for dual use investment as well. We have been working with Connecting Europe facility through Jaspers and supporting applications for the military mobility call for CEF. We continue to do this. I mean, of course, we have to see in the next financial perspective the structure for let's say Connecting Europe facility and other facilities, and how that is all going to be put together, because of course it's difficult to say at the moment until later this year, I suppose will be the first indications on this. And of course then there are other more specific funds which we're not necessarily dealing with, like the European Defence Fund as an option. But of course there are the normal grant funding means to support dual use, and just through JTF or RF, as the structural funds as well. I mean, these are all still opportunities, and to blend that as well, of course, kind of simple blending with just let's say EIB financing, co-financing, but it can be also more private sector involvement, having more blended in the sense of having PPP structures, which of course again is much more is quite relevant for from the security sector, and guarantee instruments as well, because effectively if we look at it, the needs are huge again. I mean, again, it's like also talking about the climate, the needs are huge, but in terms of support now to security, the needs are huge. The available funding, let's say at EU level, is limited, and I think that here, I think if, let's say, from at national level, of course, there will be greater commitments, and I think between, let's say, the available limited EU funding that will be available, the opportunity to blend this and to use guarantees and to involve the private sector and with the national contributions, I think it's all going to be one big pot of, let's say, contributions and responsibilities to allocate the necessary provisions for this. But yes, I think one thing that is clear is that the pot is pretty much the same. There are many different facilities. We've seen that, not just, I'm not talking only for security, but just generally between this, and they come with their own requirements, their own eligibility aspects, their own objectives, making a more complex environment to be able to navigate for counterparts. So, and this will, you know, in the case for the security, I think I would echo some of the sentiment earlier that this needs to be more coherent, and we really cannot be looking to dipping into very small pots of money to address this issue, which is going to require a much more coordinated approach. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I would now very much need such a tool. Football referee always do have when they are showing at the end of the match the additional time, which will be added to the time of the game. I think because we have started 5 minutes later, you would forgive us if we add this 5 minutes to the time of the panel. And just a bit to sum up my question to Sophie. Is it possible to achieve the climate goals without investing in transport infrastructure?
I don't think so, indeed, no. I think we'll need to continue investments in transport. And I think Oksana, at the start of the presentation, showed a very good slide of some of the new things that we'll need to do in the next periods. If we've looked at the past periods, we've seen that over 50% of funds went to road investments. Yes, there are still some gaps in the TEN-T, but I do think with this new period and the climate challenge that we have, we need to shift the balance towards different types of investments. I've mentioned at the start urban transport, public transport, where we've seen that under the past period only 14% of the money went there, whereas more than half of the population lives in semi-urban areas. So I think that's a shift that we need to make. And then Oksana also mentioned more space for zero-emission vehicles. I think there also we have opportunities, and I know that Poland is also thinking about a social leasing scheme, such as they have in France, which I think as well can achieve to go towards multiple goals, supporting the transition to zero emission, ensuring accessibility for poorer households to electric mobility, supporting our own automotive industry if we make the scheme only eligible for made in Europe vehicles. And then maybe a final point that I would like to mention for the next period is when we think about resilience, is grid investments. Making sure that we enforce our electricity networks, not just for transport, for charging infrastructure, but in general for the shift to zero-emission economy that we're trying to make.
Thank you very much. Now the final minute for you and the second question in our application. You will be given 4 priorities and you can now put them in order you think, in order of importance from your point of view. And in the meantime, before we see the results, I would like to ask to show us the results as soon as they will be available. Last 30 seconds for each of you to sum up our discussion. You can see it also on the screen before us. So last 30 seconds to sum up our discussion. Sophie, could you start, please?
I think there's, I don't remember who said it, there's many pieces of the puzzle, there's many goals that we want to achieve. For me, it's really about making sure that we don't lose the local focus of the cohesion funds. We work towards better data tools, but also that sometimes the very huge projects, we maybe separate them in smaller ones that are more manageable, where the impacts can be better tracked. That would be for me the takeaways.
Thank you very much. Maria, your summary.
This was not prepared. Okay. Well, probably I will resume in transport is a tool, but a very, very, very important tool if we want to meet the cohesion goal. And we need to level and if the funding with the requirements and with the expectations we want from the transport network.
Thank you very much. General?
Maybe main goal, work on trust building. Trust building between member states, within EU, with all the entities we have, with NATO, with everyone involved. Think in ends, ways, means. In the military, we think in ends, ways, means. We all work towards the same goal. We know what the goal is. In the end, it's a safe and a secure and a free environment for all of us. The inner layer of this onion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Alan.
Thanks very much. I would say that from the theme of sustainability and security, I don't think they're mutually exclusive. I think they're actually quite complementary, and I think there are opportunities for everyone to be able to utilize this to its best extent. I would say also that from Jaspers and from EIB advisory, that we're here to help as well. We're working with all of the counterparts, so if you want to contact any of our colleagues, please feel free and we can try and help. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Dionysio?
My final comment, we need decision makers, people, experts being able to link and coordinate the different policies, activities, actions to be able to achieve synergistic effects.
Thank you very much. Oksana?
I would like to conclude by wishing all of us, those who work with the cohesion policy and in particular transport and also funds in general, a lot of success and resilience to follow the lines of our policymakers, so the top-down level, and also to be able to accommodate the bottom-up decision-making process and the ideas and views of our stakeholders in our everyday work. And as we have seen today during our discussion, this connectivity transport element is melted in every policy area of the European Union. I would dare to say everywhere you would find this need to commute, the remote areas, so it's in many sectors of the EU policies, and we need to be resilient to continue to implement it so that indeed also our stakeholders and citizens see the fruits of this in all categories of the policies. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let us also have a brief look on the results of the inquiry. So, transport network on the first place, reducing poverty and transport exclusion on the second, dual use third, and decarbonization of transport. But I would say that achieving and doing the first, so transport network for mobility throughout the Europe, is actually something which contributes to the second, third, and fourth issue. So I think it can be also a point to start or to continue the discussion about the future cohesion policy. I would like to thank you very much for being here. I would like to thank you, the panelists, for joining us and sharing their experience. I hope it was a very interesting discussion both for our audience and for you. I would like to also thank the team from the Ministry of Regional Funds and Development, for Jarosław Orliński, and team from his department for organizing this panel. I would like to thank you for also people without whom this panel could not take place, without the volunteers, without our technical crew, just there on the top of the our room. Thank you very much, guys, for everything you did yesterday and today. Thank you very much for coming, and enjoy the dinner at the Old Depot here in Kraków. Have a nice day and have a nice the second day of the conference. Thank you very much.